I'm Kate Wexell. I just turned 19 and I'm from the United States. I was originally in St. Louis, which is sort of in the middle of the country. And now I am currently living out in San Francisco in the Bay Area. So currently I am studying public administration and policy at the University of Missouri, Columbia. And my climate project that I'll be talking to you guys about is called the Compass Online, which is a registered 501c3 educational nonprofit.
Thanks, Kate. Can you tell us a little bit about when you were growing up? Did you learn about climate change? And when did you personally become really interested and passionate about this topic?
So it was kind of interesting because I don't recall us ever having like an official course or even different lectures in public education growing up about sustainability or climate change. We would occasionally have speakers come in to talk about, for example, like how to reduce our energy, how to take shorter showers, switch to LED light bulbs, different things like that. And I always thought that those discussions were so fascinating. But really what I would say is that it was mostly my parents. My mother had really tried to make an effort in our community to be green. And I think that that came to her when she was in college a little bit. So we were that family that we would always recycle. I grew up learning how to sort out all of my recycling. We had our own little compost pile in our backyard. And so all the little neighbor kids would run up to that and be like, oh, what's that? It smells so gross. There are worms coming out of it. um, but I always sort of grew up with that mentality. I remember my brother and I used to make a game out of picking up trash on the sidewalks or in parking lots, which I think that we did have to end that pretty quickly when we kept trying to pick up glass in the Walmart parking lot. That maybe wasn't our best decision. But I don't think that I was really consciously aware of what we were doing up until I did get to college or around that age. And at that point, I started trying to consider, okay, I now have the rest of my life in front of me. What is going to actually be meaningful and give me a sense of purpose in life? And so I thought about all of the different issues in the world that there were to solve. And I realized that climate change and the environment is sort of at the root of everything, since everything on this planet belongs to the earth. And if we don't protect that, that's like the base level of what we need to be looking at first before we can even think about any other higher level of global issues.
Thank you, Kate. It's so interesting that your mom was your role model. Was she a trailblazer in your community? Tell us, like growing up, were a lot of people concerned about the environment and climate change, and what it was like for your mom to maybe be one of the few people, if she was, or what that was like?
I don't think that she really had a public face with that issue. So it wasn't like she was going around telling other people, you should do this, you should do that. But it was very interesting growing up in the Midwest, because I know here where I'm at right now, you walk down the sidewalk and there are both trash cans and recycling bins and compost in every building. And when I've gone to other countries, I've seen the same thing. We barely had trash cans where we were at in St. Louis. So I don't think that many people were aware of recycling. It was kind of a stretch to even try to get people to not use the plastic bags when they're shopping for groceries and use reusable shopping bags. I do know that my mother tried to convince people to use reusable shopping bags and things like that. But I had a lot of conversations growing up with people who didn't think that climate change existed or that it was just a natural weather pattern, different things like that. And then there were also some weird religious viewpoints where people thought that the earth was 4,000 years old and therefore climate change couldn't exist. So it was a bit of a struggle to try to deal with some of those perspectives.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm sure that's a really valuable and great learning experience for you to learn how to communicate about climate change. So when you were working on the TED video, you focused on flooding. So tell us a little bit about how climate change has impacted your community and what you've seen firsthand or, read about in the news and how you feel about that.
Yeah, so the Midwest has always had kind of strange weather. Of course, everybody complains about the weather where they're living. I think that that's just a fact of humanity. But in the Midwest, we have very polarized weather. Um, and I know we get very large storms. So when I've looked at historical documents, it's always gotten incredibly, incredibly hot in the summer and incredibly, incredibly cold in the winter. Um, However, if you look at some of the data over the past 30 to 50 years, the rate of extreme flash floods and thunderstorms have definitely increased in our area. So I grew up right along the Mississippi River. I was about 17 miles east of that. And so it was this strange dynamic where St. Louis is right on the river. And then on the other side, you have all these little towns that are in the floodplains, and they were all low income communities until you drive up into the bluffs, where then all of the upper middle class suburbs were located, and they were all fine. Um, so then as time has gone on, I know what I talked about in my TED Ed discussion was that there was a huge flood in the 90s that it completely took out towns. Um, and if you go to some of these little towns today, you can see oil refineries there. You can see just destroyed infrastructure. You can see the signs that say floods when it rains. I know I've tried driving through some of those areas after it's been raining, and you're submerged in like 2 feet of water after not very long. Last year, there was a flood that it destroyed all the animals in an animal shelter, like it killed them all. A couple people died. You could see on the news the videos of people canoeing down the streets. And so it's just a real environmental justice issue that people don't really talk about, because once it's flooded, um, the land becomes cheaper for different developers to come in and create like factories on, which then of course reduces the property value for people's houses, and then it increases the crime rate because the property value is low. And it just paves the path for people to end up in a cycle of poverty due to systems that they don't even understand. And then also, since the whole region is based on agriculture, uh, this is where I sort of struggle with the perspectives where people don't think that climate change exists, because it directly affects all of these farmers. And I had talked to a farmer this past year that he was right along the Missouri River, which is right next to the Mississippi River, and they converge right about where St. Louis is located. And his whole fields had been destroyed multiple years in a row, and he had to spend time like digging his field out of 12 feet of sand and then come up from the river. So it's just a big issue. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that example, especially as we see throughout the world flooding becoming more intense, increased flooding, around the world. And so the example you cite, even in a region that's maybe used to flooding, or maybe gets more recurring flooding than other areas, that it has gotten more intense and the impacts are so dire. And thank you for pointing out how other inequities are exacerbated by environmental events like that it's not just the immediate, kind of rebuilding or people needing to find homes, but really the long-term kind of environmental justice issues around the property value. That's a really valuable point. And I'm curious, you're very engaged and very talented. Can you tell us a little bit about the different organizations and initiatives you're involved with that work on the environment, conservation, climate change? Because I think that enables you to get a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed over time. I would say that my first real introduction to sustainability was through scouting growing up. There weren't any environmental clubs in school, nor did any of us know how to form those. And of course, environmental groups weren't super prevalent in the area. Um, but yeah, in Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, we had to learn a lot about sustainability and feeling that reverence towards the planet. And I would definitely recommend those programs to anybody. Um, I know one of the most valuable things that I learned in those was the concept of leave no trace. Um, and we had lots of discussions about that. I led workshops to teach little girls about that. Like, you can't go around picking all the flowers in a field, and it's more about like enjoy and appreciate the planet but make sure that you are not the one responsible for changing it and ruining it. Um, and so then whenever I got to college, I joined an environmental news desk very briefly. So I was writing about different environmental issues that were happening along the Mississippi River. So it covered all of the news regarding the environment from like Wisconsin all the way down to New Orleans. And so that was really interesting. Of course, I joined FXB, and I've been involved with you guys for the past year now. I would say that that was highly influential. um, and I got involved in a few other clubs at school that were related to the environment. But then I was involved with the American Conservation Coalition. So that helped to connect me to all sorts of other young people here in the United States to work on renewable energy policy. And then this summer, I interned with a group called Renew Missouri. So that was specifically looking at renewable energy in the state of Missouri. And so that was interesting because I got to collaborate directly with local nonprofits that I had known about my whole life, like the botanical gardens and groups like that. But then in addition, also like the community action agencies, the rural electric co-ops, and I got to understand more about the issues that we're facing just in the state that I grew up next to. I felt like that made a huge impact on the local community. And then now I just joined an organization called the Race to Zero Waste out here in the Bay Area. So we're working on the circular economy. Yeah. Oh, and then there's also 10 billion strong. Sorry, the list keeps going. I turned 18 and then I took it as the excuse to just do as much as I wanted to do. But that's also a nonprofit located in St. Louis. But that was more of an international scope. So I did a fellowship through the Department of State in collaboration with the embassy in Namibia. And so we developed like wildlife education curriculums that were displayed to school children in Namibia. So that was really interesting.
Wow, you do so much and you gain such unique and different perspectives on a very complex issue, sustainability and climate change. So you mentioned FXB Climate Advocates. Why did you join FXB Climate Advocates and what did you get out of the experience? And what would you tell potential applicants who are now 4 days away from closing for our fall 2023 program?
My advice to future applicants, or not necessarily advice, but more of just my message to future applicants, is that with all education, it's more about how much you want to learn, and it's about learning for the sake of learning. And so FXB really gives you the opportunity to do that and make the most of your own experience. But it covers so many different topics at a really great level for understanding that you'll become a pro within sustainability in no time. Yeah.
Thank you. And can you tell us a little bit about collaborating with another FXB climate advocate from Nigeria, I believe, and what that's been like?
Yeah. Yeah. So he reached out to me to ask if he could volunteer with my nonprofit. And it's been a really great collaboration between the two of us for the past 9 months or so. At first, he was just asking if he could create videos and reels for our social media. But then he and some of his other friends in Nigeria that are also running their own nonprofits, they wanted to create this climate change education tour. So I have been supporting them from the US. And so now it's like this whole little group. And the goal is to educate 40,000 different Nigerian university students about what climate change is in a very similar structure, I would say, to FXB. Except for they go to the universities in person, they give their presentation, and then what I'm working on is utilizing this online platform called Crew, also with another person here in the US, and we're developing like these modules so that the students can learn how to develop a like a climate project and learn how to be a green leader in their own local area within 90 days. So it's like a little challenge course that you complete in a few weeks. So yeah,
Thank you.
great.
Yeah, we always hope that advocates collaborate, and this is just a great example of what young people can do working together across geographies just through great technological tools and platforms that we have access to. So tell us about your climate action project and the Compass Online, how it started, what you hope to accomplish, and what your plans for the future.
Yeah, so the Compass originally just started as a website. I had been writing for another organization called The Diversity Story. And so you were supposed to create articles about culture, and it was poetry, recipes, interviews, different things like that. But I wanted more like factual articles about things that were going on so that people actually had like good, solid information about what other perspectives were like. And I had seen a lot of polarization, especially in my own community, when people didn't understand why people thought the way they did. So that's why I decided to create the Compass. And so it originally started as just some modules about all the different nations in the world, the major world religions, some articles about culture. Um, yeah, I think that that's all that it was at the beginning. Because I thought that those were some of the most important things for people to know about to be able to understand others. And then we also had a literary magazine and art galleries so that it could sort of bring people together through the arts. But then whenever I started the FXB Climate Advocates Program, that sort of inspired me to add on the Sustainable Development Goals because it's like, all right, you can maybe understand other people's perspectives, but then what do you do with that? And so I thought that adding in more modules about sustainable development goals would be highly beneficial to see how all of the global issues in the world are interconnected. And then also taking it a step farther to see, okay, now how can we act on that? How can we try to better our communities? So now there's also a volunteer organization database, and there are outreach projects. So one of them is the climate change education tour, and then the other one is called Project Code Red. And so that is working to provide women in Kenya and Tanzania with feminine hygiene products, but specifically ones that are reusable to sort of lessen the impact of that on the planet and improve sustainability. But also provide women with these products that a lot of them didn't even have access to beforehand, either due to the price, the lack of just knowledge about them, or there have been a lot of supply chain issues, especially since COVID. Yeah.
Thank you. And as we, as well as world leaders, prepare for COP28 Conference of Parties in Dubai in late November, what message would you send to world leaders about what they should do about climate change and the role of young people, of course, in leading climate action?
I mean, of course, with young people, the first step is listen to them. And then also, I would say, especially with young people, the focus should be on educating young people about all of these complex issues and teaching them more analytical methods to try to problem solve within these. I just don't feel like there's a huge emphasis put on learning about them in general. But then on a broader scale, just with climate change in general, I think that's something that should really be focused on is how can you collaborate with corporations to look at their supply chains? From what I can tell, there are a lot of inefficiencies, both with the energy that's used for manufacturing, production, distribution, all of that. And also just with physically the distance that people have to transport items. So I would say maybe using a model that's more similar to some Scandinavian countries where you have to use local products first before you're allowed to import products from other places, or like looking at the IKEA model, that type of thing with supply chains and production. I would say that that would be incredibly beneficial both for the consumer, the producer, and then also to reduce energy. And then also just in general, when we're thinking about climate change, the emphasis should not be put so much on how to switch your energy source as much as it should be to be thinking about how can you reduce the energy you need to use in general. That was a long-winded answer,
Yeah,
but
no, this you covered a lot. I mean, I think
Yeah.
something that I heard in your answer is really the need to rethink our economy in some ways, right? And
Yes.
consumption and of course waste management, but also production of goods. So which is, like the kind of the whole system, which, we as individuals play a part in, but of course, world leaders and policymakers and, business leaders have a really important role in actually shaping those policies that, can change those big system level issues that you mentioned. And so what
Mhm.
advice would you give to young people who, maybe are seeing the impacts of climate change, but feel hesitant to get involved because maybe they feel like they're too young or they just lack the confidence to really express their voice? What advice would you give someone who wants to get started?
I guess what I would say is, first of all, you're never too young for anything, um, except for signing legal documents. That's the only thing that you can be too young for. Uh, and so what I try to tell people a lot is if there's something that you really want to do, if there is a plan or an idea that you have, there is no need to wait until later until you think that you are good enough or ready enough or anything like that. Um, the best ideas and the best organizations have all just been started because somebody had a vision and they just went for it. So I would say it's more valuable if you really want to get involved in sustainability to just start now, and you're going to learn so much through the actual process. Don't wait until later.
Thank you. And how do you stay hopeful when sometimes the news on climate change and the climate impacts, can be very depressing. There's a lot of despair, a lot of terrible things happening. How do you stay hopeful and positive as you kind of read the news and see what's going on in your community and around the world as a result of climate change?
Honestly, I don't really think that I ever feel hopeless with any of these situations, just because if you surround yourself with people who are actually trying to change these situations, there is always hope in that. So seeing how people are working on the local level, national level, international level, and how people are trying to do these same things all over the world because we all care, like there is so much optimism in that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I mean, for us at FXB and for those kind of who have the privilege to support young people in taking climate action, what gives us hope are young people who are, not complacent, who are taking action, who are not passive observers, and who are just like you, Kate, who don't, who just don't feel hopeless, who feel like there is, opportunities to create real change. And so that's really inspiring. So, older generations can give up too easily or think within boxes or confined boxes or that we were kind of raised to be. So this is really I know that I always learn from the FXB climate advocates and your optimism, creativity, resilience, and really tenacity to take action. I mean, the amount of organizations and initiatives that you're involved with, Kate, specifically, is so inspiring. I think we need it all. We need circular economy, we need awareness, we need personal stories, we need communication, because it's really about, mobilizing hearts and minds, right? Not just the policy piece, but really changing, moving people's hearts and is pulling at those heartstrings. So it's really inspiring. And we hope to keep growing the FXB Climate Advocates Program. And of course, working closely with ambassadors and our alumni like you to let's work together. What you're doing in Nigeria with IO, we can replicate in other countries. And we have Ewi from Cameroon who just shared a manual on climate education that uses arts. So, we have all these great resources and we need everyone to work together. Thank you so much, Kate, for your time today and for your inspiring message. And we look forward to supporting you. And if you have any final words for our climate conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karina. I've really appreciated being on here today and speaking with you. I would really just say that once again, there is so much hope in the world and so many different ways that you can collaborate with other people to truly make a difference in your community.